Hey, everyone. Thanks for your participation. I wanted to read to you something tonight as we begin the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers. We pay a lot of attention to the English title of the book, Numbers, named Numbers because it begins with, in this week's Parsha, two counts, two censuses of the Israelite nation. One is a military census, and one is a census related to the Levites and the schleppers and the different things that they're going to have to carry throughout the desert and their way to the land of Israel, so that when the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple, is built, they are assigned accordingly. So we pay attention to that first census, the military one, which counts somewhere around 602,000+ Israelites, male above a certain age and under a certain age. But we don't always pay attention to the second one, which is, as I said, the counting of the Levites, who will be in charge of porterage of all of the items for the Mishkan, for the tabernacle, that they'll be schlepping from Mount Sinai to the land of Canaan, or at least to the steppes of Moab. Numbers begins the journey, though. The Israelites, as we know from Exodus, walk from somewhere, wherever their exit point is, of Egypt to Mount Sinai, and then they stay at Mount Sinai from the time that they receive the Ten Commandments all the way through the end of the book of Leviticus. So I wanted to share a teaching of Rabbi Erwin Kula. Many of you have seen him teach either on YouTube or through his association with KLAL, the National Center for Jewish Learning and Leadership. He's been on this bima before, and really a very, very thoughtful rabbi and deep human being. And he writes this piece called Through the Wilderness. The stage of journeying through the wilderness is an essential part of transformation from slavery to freedom. And here's what he says, and then I wanted to spend just a moment to reflect on it with you. He teaches that the book of Numbers, Bamidbar, describes the Israelites' 40-year journey through the desert on their way to the Promised Land. Why devote an entire book of Torah to the desert or wilderness experience? Bamidbar represents an important stage in the journey of the people from slavery to freedom. The wilderness, far beyond its geographic or historic reality, enters the Jewish experience as a central metaphor for understanding who we are and what we must do. By devoting an entire book to the wilderness experience, the Torah provides an important insight into the realm of achievement of freedom. The real achievement of freedom. Leaving Egypt in a moment of pure triumph is far easier than wrestling with the burdens of establishing a functioning community. Bamidbar shows us a people dealing with the mundane frustrations of gathering food, pitching tents, establishing rules and customs, as well as defining leadership. He doesn't say this, I'm saying this. There's a lot of kvetching in Numbers. Our ancestors complain constantly. Despite all of these issues, the murmurings described in Bamidbar, that's the kvetching, he said murmuring. The slave people raises a new generation of freeborn children. Here is a deeper understanding of the Exodus, the maturity of a people meeting the daily challenge of life in freedom with responsibility. The true goal of Exodus was to take Egypt out of the Israelites. The experience of the seemingly endless journey transformed a people, crushed, frightened, subservient, and dependent, into a people with initiative and self-respect, anger at oppression, and even militancy. The Israelites at the Jordan are very different from the Israelites who left Egypt. They are ready to fight their own fights. They are a community committed to one another and to the covenant that binds them together. Bamidbar reminds us that wherever we live, there is always a better place, a world more attractive, a promised land. But the way to that land is always through the wilderness. There is no way to get there except by joining together and marching together day after day. I think it's obvious that Rabbi Kehilah, in his commentary, is stating two essential parts of the human experience, but really through the prism of the Jewish story of Bamidbar. The first is the idea that life is not easy, that the journey is not easy for anyone. Life is hard and difficult and tragic. As I said to the confirmands last week and to Saul tonight, that there is darkness. The wilderness experience, therefore, is a metaphor. This story is a metaphor for how it is that our choices, both as individuals and a collective, can move us from that darkness to light, from slavery to freedom, from freedom to responsibility. And the second thing that I think that Rabbi Kehilah is reminding us is that you don't have to stay Bamidbar in the wilderness. It's a temporary thing. 40 years is a long time. It's 2 generations, some would say. But nonetheless, more importantly, as I said, you don't have to stay there. You don't. We all have dark times, tragedies, pains, losses, suffering, whatever you want to call these things that we experience. But it's our choice as individuals and, again, as a collective as to when we want to leave and how we want to get out and how it is that we get from there to the next place, to the next step. I think that one of the problems, the major problems that we face as a country and a civilization is that we sometimes, I think, feel that we are the only ones to experience tragedy and pain and loss and suffering. If you read or watch, I think it's easy to miss the point that our tragedies are ours for our time, but that pain and suffering and loss have been experienced by human beings, by societies, for thousands of years. When we read Numbers, when we read Bamidbar, we are reminded that getting stuck, that living through experiences that are difficult can really bring out the worst in the human condition. That pain and suffering and loss and sorrow can have the impact, the negative impact of bringing all of us down. And so on this Shabbat, I want to suggest that as we begin Numbers, as we begin Bamidbar, we think about what Rabbi Kehilah teaches and think about a little bit about what I'm attaching to that, which is the idea of, things can get bad and cause us incredible amounts of anxiety and pain, but that we don't stay in Bamidbar forever. That there is, as he put it, a promised land. That there is a so-called light at the end of the tunnel. That we aren't the first and won't be the last to experience tragedy. And that it is really up to us, each of us, as we look through the world through Jewish eyes, as we embrace the doing of mitzvot, as we engage in our daily ritual of life, to not just seek that light and give it lip service, but to actually do something about it. To know that we too can do what our ancestors did, which was, as Rabbi Kehilah said, to get from there to here by joining hands and working together. So on the Shabbat, I want you to think about that, if you would, of not just what it is that you can do, but how it is that we as a collective can move through this wilderness that we as a society are living through today, and do it with a sense of unity and purpose, and mostly a sense of responsibility of a people who have freedom. And so enjoy these next few weeks of stories about kvetching and talking donkeys and rebels and earths opening up, sort of like in Hawaii, opening up and gobbling up rebels. But ultimately, let's look forward as well as we live through these weeks to entering the promised land, to going into the land ready, willing, and able to conquer it, to create the ideal perfect society together. Shabbat Shalom.